Snow hammered the iron gates of the Halloran estate the night everything ended, and Jonah Cade stood inside the security lights with his two 8-year-old children shivering against his coat, while Odin, his Belgian Malinois, growled low at the men his father-in-law had sent to finish the eviction. Above them on the stone veranda where Mara Cade had been married 7 August before Preston Halloran III watched with his hands folded behind his back like a man supervising a contract. And somewhere 6 hours north beneath the rotted floorboards of a farmhouse he did not know existed $212 million in trust documents were already waiting for Odin to find them. Jonah had been out of the Navy for 31 months, 15 years of service before that. He was 38 years old, lean in a way that had nothing to do with gems, and the quiet at the center of him had been Mara's favorite thing about him. Mara had died on a Tuesday in December 14 months ago, pancreatic cancer, stage 4 by the time they found it, and tonight standing in snow up to his boots, while one of Preston's men tossed a cardboard box labeled Mara Personal off the top step, Jonah understood that the last piece of his old life was being broken deliberately where the children could see it. The box hit the drive, something inside it shattered. Willa, his daughter, made a sound that was not quite a word. Sawyer, his son, clenched his jaw the way Jonah used to clench his before a breach. The boy was 8 years old and he had learned to swallow grief the way his father had taught him to, and Jonah hated himself a little for that every single day. Preston Halloran finally spoke. He did not raise his voice. Preston never raised his voice. That was the thing people misread about him. This arrangement was temporary, Mr. Cade. The old man adjusted a cashmere scarf at his throat. Mara asked me to house you during her illness. I did so as a courtesy to my daughter. My daughter is no longer with us, and your permission to remain on this property has ended. Odin shifted forward by half a step. His ears dropped flat against his skull. The low growl that had been building in his chest rolled out into the open air, and the two private security men standing behind Preston took a small step back without meaning to. Jonah felt the dog's warmth against his left knee and did not call him off. I fought beside men half as composed as you, Preston. Jonah's voice was soft, and I would have trusted any of them with my children before I'd trust you. Preston smiled without warmth. You don't have to trust me, you have to leave. A second man was carrying the lamp, Mara's lamp, the ceramic one with the pressed flowers she had made in a pottery class the year Sawyer and Willa were born. Jonah saw the man's grip slip before he threw it. The lamp turned once in the air and struck the stone at the bottom of the steps and burst into fragments that skidded across the ice. Willa made the small sound again. She pressed her face into the side of Jonah's coat. Sawyer looked at the lamp on the ground and then looked up at his grandfather with a coldness Jonah had never seen on a child's face before and would not forget for the rest of his life. Jonah did not raise his voice either. This isn't stability, Preston. He spoke slow and even. This is cruelty, and she would have known it. Preston looked at him for a long moment. The snow fell between them. Somewhere at the edge of the property, a service gate opened, and a black SUV eased through it and sat with its headlights off. Odin noticed before Jonah did. The dog's head turned a fraction of an inch toward the vehicle, marked it, and turned back. Jonah knelt down. He put one hand on Willa's shoulder and one hand on Sawyer's, grounding himself through their weight, through the small heat of them, through the trembling that had nothing to do with the cold. He spoke low the way he had once spoken to men he was about to lead into a building. We're going to the truck, he told them. You're going to hold my hands. You're going to walk with me, and you're not going to look back. Odin is right behind us. We are going to be all right. Sawyer nodded once military clean. Willa did not lift her face from his coat. Jonah stood up. The iron gates rolled open behind him with the slow, metallic sound of money doing exactly what money does. He did not turn around. He walked the children through falling snow to the old Silverado he had bought with his separation. Pay lifted them into the bench seat and went back once for the box labeled Mara Personal. Odin waited for him at the truck. When Jonah came back with the box, the Malinois jumped into the cab without being asked and positioned himself across the children's laps, 45 kilograms of heated weighted blanket with teeth. Jonah climbed in. He did not look at the estate in the rearview. The Silverado's heater wheezed to life. The wipers cleared a shape of the world in front of him. Behind them in the side mirror, Jonah saw the iron gates closing. He saw his father-in-law still standing on the veranda, a small, dark figure against the lit stone of the house. He saw the black SUV pull out of the service gate and settle in behind them 200 meters back, running without headlights on a county road in a blizzard. Willa finally spoke. Her voice was thin and strange. "Where are we going, Daddy?" Jonah watched the SUV in the mirror. He watched it stay with him through the first turn, in the second turn, in the third. He watched Odin watching it too, the dog's eyes steady, unblinking, already doing what Jonah had trained him to do for 3 years, and what Mara somewhere must have known he would do long before that. "Somewhere safe, baby," Jonah said. It was the first lie he had ever told her. And 6 hours north, at the other end of a county road that had not been plowed in 2 days, a rotted floorboard was waiting for a Belgian Malinois with a scarred shoulder to decide on the first night in a dead woman's farmhouse that something underneath it needed to come up. They drove north on US 87 in the worst whiteout Jonah had seen outside of Kandahar. The Silverado was 20 years old, and the heater never quite caught up to the cold, and the headlights made a cone of moving snow that ended about 40 feet past the hood. Sawyer fell asleep first. Willa followed him about an hour later, her cheek against Odin's back, her small fingers twisted into the dog's collar. The black SUV peeled off near Buffalo and did not follow them further. Jonah had watched for it in the mirror every 30 seconds for 3 hours, and when it finally turned, he felt something in his chest unclench that he knew professionally should not unclench yet. He wiped the inside of the windshield with the heel of his palm. The glass cleared, and for a second there was a shape of moisture there, a pattern of condensation that made no sense to anyone but him, and Mara laughed at him, in his head the way she had laughed the first winter in their apartment in Virginia Beach, pointing at the frost flowers on the kitchen window and saying they looked like something he brought back from the sand. He had told her the sand did not make frost flowers. She had told him she didn't care. The memory lasted 2 seconds. Then it was Guyan, and he was back in Wyoming with his children asleep against a service dog in a farmhouse that belonged to a grandmother he had met exactly twice. They arrived at Cold Fork at 4:17 in the morning. Mara's maternal grandmother, Ada Wentworth, had kept the farmhouse on the northern ridge of Sheridan County until she died 10 years ago. Mara had inherited it through her mother's line, which was a line Preston Halloran did not like to discuss. Jonah had not set foot on the property since his wedding week, when Ada had made them lemon cake on a wood stove and had looked at Jonah with old, clear eyes and had said, "Take her far from that house." He remembered the sentence. He had not at the time understood it. The farmhouse was worse than he remembered. The roof sagged on the east side where a spruce had fallen against it some winter in the last decade. One of the porch steps was missing entirely. The front door stuck and had to be shouldered open. Inside smelled of cold wood, mouse, and the faint, persistent mildew of a house that had been breathing its own damp air for too long. Jonah carried each child in turn across the threshold and set them on a dust sheet he pulled off an armchair. The portable heater he had thrown in the truck bed 6 months ago coughed and caught on the third try, casting a weak orange glow across a floor that had not been swept since Ada died. Odin did not sit down. The Malinois moved through the house the way Jonah had taught him to clear a building room by room, a soft and methodical working trot. Nose down, nose up, nose to the corner, nose to the baseboard. Jonah watched him from the fireplace with the heater in his hands. The dog went through the kitchen. The dog went through the back pantry. The dog went up the stairs and down the stairs. The dog came back into the main room and did not sit down. He stopped in front of a warped floorboard near the hearth about 6 feet from where Jonah was standing, and he lowered his head and whined. Jonah watched him. Odin pawed the board once, whined again deeper this time. "Probably a raccoon nest, buddy." Jonah crouched by the heater. His voice was quieter than he meant it to be. "Not tonight, we'll look in the morning." Odin did not move off the board. Willa sat up on the dust sheet and rubbed her eyes. She looked around the room. She looked at the peeling wallpaper in the stained ceiling and the old mounted elk head above the mantel that had lost one of its glass eyes. Then she stood up, walked to the doorway of what used to be Ada Wentworth's parlor, and stopped there, and she said something in the small, clear voice of an 8-year-old that Jonah had not been ready for. Mom wouldn't like this place. Jonah knelt down in front of her. He put his hands on her shoulders. He looked at her the way he used to look at Mara when Mara needed to know he was still listening. Your mom would like that we're together, baby. That's what she would like. Willa considered this. She was thinking about it the way she thought about everything slowly and seriously, like a small judge. Then she nodded once and she walked over and laid down on the dust sheet next to her brother and put her arm across his chest. Jonah set up the sleeping bags. He laid the children down in them. He unzipped his own bag halfway and sat on top of it with his back against the couch. The heater burned orange. The wind came down off the ridge and found every gap in every window. Odin still had not sat down. The Malinois was facing the floorboard. He was sitting upright in the way a working dog sits when it has decided on its own authority that something in the environment has not yet been accounted for. His ears were forward. His weight was balanced on all 4 paws, not resting. Jonah had seen that posture in 100 rooms in 4 countries, and it had always meant the same thing. Jonah closed his eyes for a second. When he closed his eyes, he saw the iron gates again, the slow, metallic roll of them. Preston's small figure on the veranda, the black SUV without headlights on a county road. He opened his eyes. Odin was still facing the floorboard. Outside, the blizzard settled into the long, slow, hourly patience of a real Wyoming storm. Inside, a Belgian Malinois sat up on watch in a dead grandmother's farmhouse and did not move and did not sleep and did not once take his eyes off of one warped pine board near the hearth, as if he had decided without asking anyone's permission that whatever was under it had already started to rise. Morning came. Jonah made oatmeal on the propane camp stove he kept in the truck bed because the farmhouse stove was older than his father and he did not trust it yet. Sawyer ate. Willa did not. The wind had settled down to something like normal by 10 in the morning, and the sky had that flat, pale Wyoming winter blue that pretended nothing had happened. Jonah took Odin outside to walk the property. The first thing he saw was at the tree line. It was a shape, dark vertical shape in the pines along the north edge of the hayfield, about 200 meters from the house. The shape did not move with the wind. It stayed exactly where it was while the branches around it shifted. Jonah looked at it directly, and the shape was gone. Odin looked at the same place for a long time. Jonah walked the line of the property with the doik at his heel. He found fresh tire tracks on the shoulder of the county road at the foot of the drive. The tracks were wide. The tread pattern was Michelin LTX, the same tread he had seen on Preston's security fleet for 3 years. A heavy vehicle, recently stopped. Not a work truck. He filed that detail the way he had filed details in Mosul, the way he had filed details at checkpoints, the way he had been filing details since he was 22 years old. The second thing he saw was on the drive back from the grocery in town. He had left the children with Odin and a bolted door and had driven the 40 minutes into Cold Fork proper to buy groceries because nothing in the farmhouse pantry was younger than Willa. On the way back, he saw the SUV. It was parked off the county road tucked behind a brake of leafless aspens on a service turnout that was technically Bureau of Land Management ground. Tinted windows, no plates visible from the angle. Engine running. He could see the faint ghost of exhaust against the cold air. Jonah did not slow down. He did not look directly. He marked it in his periphery and drove past at the same speed he had been going. He told Sawyer when he got home that he had seen a black bird on the road. Sawyer looked at him the way 8-year-olds look at a father who has just said something unconvincing and did not press it. That night, Jonah walked the property line again with Odin. He found the footprints on the north side of the barn. A man's boot, size 11, Vibram sole pattern, sharp edges still holding, which meant less than a day old. The prints came out of the tree line, crossed behind the barn, approached the house to within about 20 meters, and then turned and walked back into the tree line the way they had come. They did not enter the house. They did not knock. They measured. Jonah stood in the snow with his dog for a long time. Odin sniffed each print all the way back to the tree edge. He did not growl. He did not bark. He did what he had been trained to do, which was gather and remember. And when Jonah finally turned back toward the house, Odin followed him with the catalog of a stranger's weight and gait and scent now filed inside him. The fourth thing happened the next morning. Sawyer came down the stairs with Mara's old phone in his hands. The phone had been Mara's, and after she died, Sawyer had kept it because it had her pictures on it. It was supposed to have no active service. It was supposed to be a small, silver rectangle of photographs and nothing more. But there was a new message on the lock screen sent to the old Halloran family group chat that Mara had never left, and Sawyer had read it before he had thought about whether he should. "Dad!" He held out the phone. "Grandpa says, he says." The boy's jaw was clenching. "He says he's going to make sure we end up where we belong." Jonah took the phone. He read the message once. He read it twice. And then the kitchen stopped being the kitchen. A sound came out of somewhere. Later, he would decide it had been a nail gun at the neighbor's sawmill, the old tollbird after Aerotolber operation a mile south starting up its morning run. In the moment, it was not a nail gun. It was a rifle close, and the light changed, and the floor under his feet was not pine anymore. It was concrete with a thin layer of grit and pulverized masonry, and the air had the smell of burned wiring and old sweat and that specific compound they had always used at the forward base. And Corporal Elias Reed was shouting something at him from the doorway of a house that did not exist anymore, and Jonah could not remember what he had been shouting. He could not breathe. His vision narrowed. The kitchen went tunnel. His hands were not working. His hands were somewhere else. The sound of Elias Reed shouting was louder than the sound of his own daughter saying, "Daddy." Odin hit him. The dog slammed his full body weight against Jonah's left side, 45 kilograms of working Malinois driving into his hip and thigh, and the warmth of him came through Jonah's jeans like a hand, and the smell of him jaw in winter, and the grain of a working coat was a Wyoming smell, not a Mosul smell, and Jonah found his breath. He found it the way Odin had been trained to make him find it. He counted 3 breaths in, 4 breaths out. The kitchen came back. The pine floor came back. Willa was standing in the doorway with her hand over her mouth, and Sawyer was standing next to her with the phone still in his own hand, and Odin was pressed against Jonah's leg with his head turned up, watching his face waiting. "I'm okay." Jonah said it out loud. He was not sure if he believed it. "I'm okay." His hands were still shaking. They shook for a long time after. He looked at the message on the phone again. He read the words. He thought about the man who had walked to within 20 meters of his children's bedroom window in Vibram boots. He thought about the SUV idling on a public turnout in a blizzard. He thought about the iron gates, the lamp, the calm voice, the words temporary and permission. This was not pressure. This was not intimidation. This was surveillance. This was preparation. The fight had already begun. That night, the storm came back. It came back harder than the first one. The wind off the north ridge hit the farmhouse broadside at about 9 in the evening and did not let up, and by 10 the power lines coming in from the county road had gone dark, and Jonah sat in the main room with a kerosene lantern between himself and his children and kept his rifle clean and unloaded, resting against the arm of the couch where his hand could reach it if it had to. Sawyer and Willa were on the dust sheet by the hearth, not asleep. They had stopped pretending to sleep about an hour ago. Odin was not on the sheet with them tonight. Odin was 6 feet away, sitting upright, facing the warped floorboard, near the hearth, and he had not taken his eyes off of it since dinner. The first sound came at 10:40. It was a bang, a single heavy impact against the outer wall of the house on the north side, low about waist height. The whole wall shuddered. Willa jumped. Sawyer sat straight up. Odin's head swung toward the wall, but his body did not. He stayed facing the floorboard. Jonah stood. He took the lantern in his left hand and the rifle in his right. He went to the window. He shone the lantern out through the glass. Nothing. Snow and more snow and the long dark line of the tree line where a boot print had been measuring his family 2 days ago. He sat back down. He told the children it was ice falling off the roof. They knew it was not ice falling off the roof. Willa moved closer to her brother. Sawyer took her hand. The second sound came 11 minutes later. It was a scrape, something long and slow along the exterior siding of the house, running from the back porch toward the front, the kind of sound a branch makes when the wind is pushing it, except there was no branch on that side of the house because Jonah had cleared them all that afternoon. The sound ran the length of the wall and then stopped. Odin stood up. He did not move toward the window. He did not move toward the door. He walked with purpose back to the warped floorboard near the hearth, and he stood on top of it, and he looked at Jonah, and he barked once. Sharp, insistent, not the alert bark he used at strangers. A different one, an older one. A bark Jonah had only heard him use twice before, both times at work, both times right before the handler had needed to know something that the dog already knew. Odin! Jonah's voice was low. Come here, buddy. The Malinois did not move. The third sound came fast and close. It was a knock. 3 knocks hard at the front door. The kind of knock a man makes when he wants you to open the door. Willa made a small sound. Sawyer pulled her closer against his shoulder. Jonah stood and crossed to the door with the lantern and the rifle, and he did not open it. He spoke through the wood. Who's there? Nothing answered him. There was no shuffle of feet on the porch. There was no retreating sound across the snow. He waited a full 30 seconds. He waited a full minute. He eased the door open 2 inches, and then 6 inches, and then wide, and he stood in the doorway with the lantern lifted. The porch was empty. The snow on the steps was unbroken. There were no boot prints. He stared at the clean, untouched snow on the front steps for a long time. There had been no man on the porch. No man had made those 3 knocks, and yet he had heard them. His children had heard them. Odin had heard them. He closed the door. He put the bolt across. And at that exact moment behind him, the warped floorboard near the hearth gave way. It did not creak. It did not settle. It collapsed with the sharp, dry crack of old pine, finally releasing a weight it had been holding for longer than anyone in the room had been alive. Splinters went up and out in a brief pale starburst. Willa screamed. Sawyer scrambled backward across the dust sheet. Odin, who had been standing on that board half a second earlier, lunged forward instead of back, stopped at the edge of the hole. Muscles' rigid nose pointed straight down into the dark of it. Jonah crossed the room in 4 strides. He knelt at the edge of the hole. He held the lantern down into it. The light caught on metal. It was a box. Reinforced steel, flat black, the corners mitered with heavy brass fasteners. It was sitting on packed dirt, about 18 inches below the level of the floor, tucked between 2 joists, as if someone had cut a space for it and lowered it in and replaced the board over top of it. Jonah recognized the corner fasteners before he recognized the box. He had used boxes like that overseas. Ammunition, sensitive documents. The kind of box a unit quartermaster kept a certain kind of thing in. Ada Wentworth had died 10 years ago. Ada Wentworth had never served. But Mara had come to this farmhouse every August of her life. Mara had come alone. Mara had told him she was visiting her grandmother. He lowered himself into the hole. It took him a full minute to work the box free. He handed it up onto the pine floor. He climbed out after it. Willa and Sawyer had not moved from the dust sheet. They were watching him the way children watch a thing that they already half understand. Odin had his chest against Jonah's left thigh, a steady, unmoving pressure, and did not look away from the box. Jonah opened it. The smell came up first, cedar and old wool, and something faintly like the perfume Mara used to wear on Sundays. On top of everything else folded was a cream-colored wool shawl with a pattern of small brown flowers along the hem. Mara had worn it to their wedding reception. He had not seen it in 14 months. He had assumed Preston's people had thrown it out. Under the shawl was a sealed envelope in Mara's handwriting. Under the envelope was a small, padded case containing a USB flash drive. Under the case was a sheaf of legal documents with a blue notary seal and signatures Jonah did not recognize. And on top of the documents was a business card. Samuel Pierce, attorney at law, Pierce and Langdon, LLC, Billings, Montana. There was a phone number handwritten on the back of the card in Mara's loopy, deliberate cursive, and above the number in her own hand, she had written 3 words. Call him first. Jonah picked up the envelope. He broke the seal. He unfolded the letter. The paper was a single page. The handwriting was hers, the same handwriting that had written grocery lists and birthday cards, and on the last morning of her life, a note he still kept folded in his wallet. The letter was short. It had clearly been written in a hurry. Jonah, if you are reading this, then what I feared has already begun. My father will not stop. He has never stopped in his life. The truth is in Samuel Pierce's hands. He has known me longer than my father has ever known himself. Do not trust anyone with the Halloran name. Do not wait for them to come to you. Protect Sawyer and Willa. Trust Odin. He knows things I did not have time to explain to you. I love you. I am so sorry, M. Jonah lowered the letter. The kerosene lantern made a small ring of light around the 3 of them on the pine floor, and the storm outside had gone quiet in that specific listening way. Storms get sometimes as if the weather itself had finally shut up to pay attention. And Willa looked at the letter in her father's hand, and she said in the clear, serious voice of an 8-year-old who had just understood something that adults take years to understand, Mom knew. She said it again softer. She knew all of this. Jonah looked at his daughter. He looked at his son. He looked at the bong who was still pressed against his leg and was still watching the hole in the floor as if it were not finished giving things up yet. We're not staying here tonight. Jonah's voice was very steady. We're going to Billings. We're going to find Samuel Pierce, and then we're going to decide how we fight back. Odin got up. The Malinois walked to the front door, sat down in front of it, and waited for Jonah to put on his coat. They did not sleep that night. Jonah packed the truck in the dark with the lantern between his teeth, and by 3 in the morning they were on US 87 southbound. The 2 children wrapped in blankets across the bench seat, the lockbox under the driver's side floorboard, the Belgian Malinois curled across their laps with his nose pointed at the passenger door. The storm had broken. The sky was clear and very black and very full of stars, and Jonah Cade drove north and east out of Wyoming into Montana with his wife's letter in his coat pocket, and he did not look in the rear view more than twice. Billings was 350 miles. They made it by 9:14 in the morning. Pierce and Langdon, LLC, had offices on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown above a camera shop that had been closed since the pandemic. The waiting room smelled of old carpet and fresh coffee, and Samuel Pierce came out to meet them himself instead of sending a paralegal, which told Jonah something before a single word had been spoken. Pierce was in his middle 60s. He had white hair cropped close to his scalp, wire-framed reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the particular straight spine of a man who had served in his youth and never gotten around to losing the habit. On the wall behind his desk hung a Navy service commendation in a plain wood frame. Vietnam era. Jonah noticed it before he noticed the law books. Pierce looked at the children and at the pudding, and he did not ask them to wait outside. You found the first box. His voice was quiet. I had started to wonder if you would. She told me to call you first. Jonah set the lockbox on the desk between them. I called you from a gas station in Sheridan at 4 this morning. You didn't ask me what was in it. I didn't need to. Pierce sat down. He gestured to the chair. Your wife was one of the 3 most careful people I have ever met in 40 years of practice, Mr. Cade. She spent the last 18 months of her life making sure I would not need to ask questions when you walked through that door. Sit down, please. All of you. Willa climbed into the chair next to her father. Sawyer stood behind it, his small hand on the back of the leather, and he did not let go. Odin lay down across Jonah's boots in the way a service dog lies across a handler's boots, which is a way that looks relaxed and is not relaxed at all. Pierce opened a manila folder from the top drawer of his desk. I am going to tell you some things in a particular order. He looked at Jonah over the wire frames. I want you to understand that the order is deliberate. Your wife chose it. Stop me whenever you need to. Go ahead. The first thing, Pierce laid out a document. Your wife had a modest personal inheritance from the Halloran estate, $750,000 in an irrevocable account your father-in-law could not touch. He knew about that one. That one was the decoy. Jonah nodded. He had expected that part. $750,000 was a number the Hallorans used for cars. The second thing, Pierce laid out a second document, older, yellowed at the edges. Your wife's maternal grandmother, Ada Wentworth, was the last surviving direct heir of the Wentworth Moss estate out of Galveston, Texas. The Wentworth Moss estate. You have heard the name Moss in the context of early Texas biotech. You have also heard the name Wentworth in the context of 1920s East Texas oil. Jonah had heard both names. Every American had heard both names. Mara's mother, Pierce continued, was a Wentworth Moss on paper, and in truth, her father never fully understood that. He believed, and he told Mara for 30 years that the Wentworth Moss line had been disinherited and dissolved before Mara was born. It had not. It had been hidden by a woman who had married the wrong man and was trying to protect her daughter from him. The trust was reorganized in 1978 and placed in the care of my firm and two others. Your grandmother-in-law, Ada, was its active steward until her death. Your wife inherited that stewardship at age 28. She hid it from your father-in-law for another 10 years. She hid it from you for a different reason. Mr. Cade and I am about to read you a paragraph in her words that explains why. Jonah sat very still. Pierce did not read it yet. He set a third document on the desk. The third thing. His voice did not change. The current appraised value of the Wentworth Moss Trust, consolidated as of the last audit, completed on September 14th of last year, is $212 million. The heater in the office hummed. Snow tapped once against the window. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and stopped. Nobody in the room breathed. That's impossible. Jonah's voice was flat. Mara drove a 2011 Subaru. She bought her clothes at the Target off of Holland Road. Odin shifted his weight across Jonah's boots. The dog had read the change in his handler's breathing before the words came out. Yes. Pierce almost smiled. She did, on purpose. Your wife was smarter than her father ever knew, Mr. Cade. She was smarter than most people on either side of this desk. She hid a 9-figure estate inside the life of a Navy wife in a rental townhouse for a decade because she understood exactly what her father would do the day he found out. And she was right. He found out somehow in the last month of her life. We do not yet know how. And he has spent the 14 months since then trying to set the conditions under which he could take legal custody of her children before he moved on the trust. Pierce slid the fourth document across the desk. This is the activation clause. The trust pays out into a protected family structure under 3 conditions. 1, the death of the principal beneficiary, which occurred 14 months ago. 2, the principal beneficiary's express designation of a successor, which is you. 3, the presence of documented coercion, manipulation, or custody interference against the successor by any member of the Halloran family. Jonah looked at the paper. He has done all 3, Pierce said. He has done them in writing. He has done them on camera in some instances. Your wife predicted every move he would make, and she built a document that locks him out of this money permanently the moment he makes them. He made every single one of them last month. The trust is fully activated. It pays to a structure you control and trust for Sawyer and Willa, with me and 2 co-trustees as legal overseers. Your father-in-law will never see a dollar of it. Jonah stared at the number for a long time. $212 million. He thought of Mara at the kitchen table in Virginia Beach, with a bowl of instant ramen laughing about something on the radio. He thought of her cutting coupons for diapers the month the twins were born. He thought of her standing in a line at the Target customer service counter to return a lamp that was $9 because it had a crack in the base. And he thought of her telling him on a beach in Corolla, the summer before she got sick, that the only thing she had ever wanted in her life was to be with a man who could not be bought. She had said it exactly like that. Could not be bought. He had not understood at the time why she had phrased it that way. He understood now. Outside the window, a black SUV pulled to the curb on the far side of the street. Odin noticed first. The dog's head came up off Jonah's boot. His ears tipped forward. A low rumble started in his chest, and Pierce, who had been watching Jonah's face, turned his own head and looked out the window. "That's not one of mine." Pierce's voice was dry. "My associates drive domestic. That is a rental vehicle with tinted windows parked outside of my office building at 9:47 in the morning. Your father-in-law learned you were coming." Jonah closed the lockbox. He put his hand on Odin's head, and he said quietly to nobody in the room and to everyone in it at once, "It's starting." They drove back to Cold Fork that afternoon. Odin rode in the passenger seat beside Jonah for the first hour, then moved to the back with the children when Willa started to shake in her sleep and pressed the length of his body along her side until she stopped. Jonah could have stayed in Billings. Pierce had offered a safe house, a hotel under the firm's name, a rotating three-man security team on a retainer Jonah had not known lawyers kept. Jonah had said no. He had said it without raising his voice. He had said, "Samuel, if I run now, I am running forever." My wife did not hide in Galveston. She did not hide in Virginia Beach. She built a house I did not know she was building, and she lived a whole life inside it, and she stayed. So we stay. Pierce had looked at him for a long time. Then he had nodded once, and he had said, "Then we start filing at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and I will be at your kitchen table in Sheridan County inside 72 hours. They got home at dusk. The power was out. Jonah saw it before he turned into the drive. The farmhouse, which should have had a porch light on because he had left it on, was dark against the snow. The security bulb he had wired to the barn that morning was dark. The line from the county pole was dark. And when he rolled the Silverado to a stop at the edge of the hayfield and got out with his hand already on the truck door for cover, he saw the wire. It was on the ground, 15 feet of it, cleanly cut at both ends with what had been, to judge from the clean angle, a pair of insulated bolt cutters. The cut was not old. Snow had fallen on it but not covered it. There were fresh boot prints next to the cut. Vibram sole, size 11. The same tread he had found behind the barn 2 nights ago, walking the same patient measuring path back into the tree line. Odin sniffed the cut end of the wire once, then the boot prints, then the direction the prints were heading. He did not growl, he cataloged. That was step 1. Step 2 came at 10:06 the next morning. Sheriff Ray Dillard's cruiser rolled into the drive alone, no lights, no second vehicle, and Ray got out with an envelope in his hand and with an expression Jonah did not like. Ray was 58. He had been the sheriff of the eastern half of Sheridan County for 16 years, and Mara, who had grown up spending summers at Ada's, had known Ray since she was a freckled 11-year-old trying to fish without a license in Piney Creek. Ray had let her off with a lecture and a Coca-Cola. Mara had told Jonah that story on their second date. Ray came up onto the porch. He took off his hat. "Mr. Cade," his voice was careful, "I am not here to serve you. I want to be clear about that before I hand you this envelope. But your father-in-law has filed an emergency custody petition out of Casper, citing PTSD, unstable housing, and unemployment. And he has attached affidavits from 2 people I do not know, claiming conversations with you that I do not believe occurred. A judge I also do not know signed a temporary order yesterday afternoon. I am required to deliver a copy to you. That is what this is. It is not an enforcement action. Yet." Jonah took the envelope. He did not open it. Ray Dillard looked at Jonah, and then he looked out across the hayfield toward the tree line where the wire had been cut, and he lowered his voice. "The men who cut your line." Ray did not look at Jonah when he said it. "I drove the shoulder this morning. The tracks came in from the east on a rental tire. Those boots, those tires. Those aren't local kids, Jonah. Those aren't Cold Fork boys blowing off steam at the Veterans Place. Whoever that is, he knew when you'd be gone, and he knew where the line came in, and he was gone before dawn. You watch your family. You call me before you call anybody else. I'm old, and I'm 3 years from pension, And I am telling you right now that I do not like one single thing about the paperwork I just handed you. Ray put his hat back on. He walked back to his cruiser. He pulled out of the drive slowly and with what Jonah recognized from a lifetime of operational awareness as deliberate courtesy. Ray was giving him room. Step 3 came 14 minutes later. Sawyer was at the kitchen table. He had been quiet all morning. He looked up at Jonah with his jaw clenched the way he had learned to clench it, and he said, "Dad, are they going to take us?" Jonah put the envelope down. He knelt. He put a hand on each of his son's shoulders. "Not while I am breathing, Sawyer. Do you hear me? Not while I am breathing." Sawyer nodded. He did not cry. He had not cried in 14 months, and Jonah did not know whether to be proud of him or terrified of him, so he held him for a long time instead of deciding. Step 4 came as soon as he let go. The radio on Ray's belt had clicked as Ray got back into the cruiser. Dispatch, or something like dispatch, a small electronic burst of static, and the sound of that static at a particular frequency took Jonah back somewhere he had not asked to go. Not all the way, not the way it had taken him 2 days ago in the kitchen. This one was smaller. It was a tremor that started at the base of his spine and ran up between his shoulder blades, and his vision narrowed by about 20% at the edges and the light in the kitchen flattened. His breathing went shallow and quick. He did not go to the floor. He put both hands flat on the edge of the kitchen table. He pressed down. He felt the pine grain under his palms. He counted. Odin was against him before he finished the first count. The Malinois came across the kitchen in 2 strides and pressed his full body weight against Jonah's left leg from hip to knee, 45 kilograms of pressure and warmth, and Jonah's breath caught and then it steadied, and the edges of his vision widened back out, and the kitchen was the kitchen again. 5 sentences. He had made it through in 5 sentences. He whispered down at the top of his dog's head. He did not say, "I'm okay this time." He said something different. He said, "I'm here." He said it like he meant it. Step 5 came about an hour later, and it came from the driveway. June Calloway came up the drive in her old maroon F-150. June owned the Cold Fork Diner in town, and he had known Mara since the two of them had been 6 years old, stealing rhubarb out of Ada Wentworth's back garden. June got out of the truck carrying a covered casserole and a cloth bag of bread, and she climbed up onto the porch without waiting to be invited. She looked past Jonah into the dark kitchen, and she looked at the children at the table, and she looked at the Belgian Malinois at Jonah's side, and she handed him the casserole. "Eat." Her voice was rough in the way certain Montana women's voices are always rough. "Then we talk. I grew up with your wife, Mr. Cade. Mara was the only good thing that ever came out of that house down in Wind River. I don't know what's going on up here, but I know the shape of it, and I know which side I'm on. You eat, and then you tell me what you need, and I will tell you which of my regulars you can trust and which of them you cannot." Jonah took the casserole. He almost cried right there on the porch, and he did not because Sawyer was watching him from the kitchen doorway. But for the first time since the iron gates had closed behind him in Wyoming, he felt the small, steady weight of another human being deciding to stand next to him without being asked. Behind him inside the house, Odin lifted his head suddenly off the floor and stared hard at the door to the back pantry. His ears went forward. A low rumble started in his chest. He stood up. He walked with purpose past Jonah and past June and through the kitchen, and he stopped at the back door and barked once sharp and insistent, the old bark, the bark he had used the night the floorboard collapsed. Jonah looked at June. June looked at Jonah. "Stay with the kids," Jonah said. He went out the back. He crossed the yard in the cold afternoon light with the Malinois at his heel, and the dog walked him past the ruin of the chicken coop, past the lean-to where Ada had kept her firewood, and he walked Jonah to the old horse barn at the back of the property, the one Ada had stopped using in 1994, and Odin stopped at the double doors and did not move. The doors were chained shut. The chain was Jonah's. He had put it on the day they arrived. Odin was not looking at the chain. He was looking at a small, square tackroom door to the right of the main barn doors. A low door Jonah had assumed was nailed shut from the inside, and he was barking at the base of that door, the way he had barked at a piece of floorboard 3 nights ago, and Jonah Cage stood in the snow with his dog and understood that his wife, who had hidden 9 figures of biotech money inside a life of instant ramen and Target lamps for a decade, had not been done hiding things when she died. The tack room door opened on rusted hinges. Inside the room was 10 feet by 8, cold and almost empty. A wooden saddle rack, a broken halter, and a steel footlocker pushed into the back left corner under a pile of moth-eaten horse blankets. Jonah pulled the blankets off. He saw the back wall behind the locker. The back wall was plywood. The plywood was not original. The plywood had been installed at a guess within the last 5 years. There were 4 Phillips screws holding it in place. Mara's father's contractors did not use Phillips. They used square drive. Mara had used Phillips her whole life. He got the screws out with the multi-tool from his belt. Odin stood at the threshold of the tack room with his ears forward. He did not enter. He was waiting for Jonah to find what he had already smelled. The plywood came off. Inside the wall between 2 studs was a second lockbox. Same reinforced steel as the first. Same brass fasteners. Slightly larger. Jonah lifted it out. He carried it back to the house across the snow with the Malinois leading and with his heart beating in the steady, controlled rhythm of a man who had stopped being surprised by what his wife had done with her life and had started instead to feel the first clean edge of something that was not grief. It was closer to awe. June had the children at the kitchen table with bread and casserole. The color had come back into Willa's cheeks. Sawyer was eating. Jonah set the second lockbox on the pine planks and sat down. Baby. He looked at his daughter. Your mom left us one more thing. I need you and your brother to sit with Miss June for a few minutes, and I am going to read it, and then I'm going to tell you what it says. All of it, every word. Can you do that for me? Willa looked at him with eyes that were not an 8-year-old's eyes. She nodded once. Jonah opened the box. There was a second envelope thicker than the first. There was a second flash drive protected in a waterproof case. There was a small stack of 8 by 10 photographs. And on top of the photographs, like a deliberate signpost, was a single color print of Preston Halloran III in a tuxedo shaking hands at what looked like a formal wedding reception with a man Jonah recognized from the Casper Star-Tribune, Judge Dean Fletcher. Judge Dean Fletcher, who had signed the emergency custody order in Jonah's mom's envelope 2 rooms away, and who had also, Jonah remembered in a cold rush of clarity, been investigated and quietly censured in 2019 for accepting campaign contributions from energy concerns with cases pending in his court. The photograph was date-stamped August 2017. Jonah set the photograph down. He opened the envelope. The letter was 4 pages long this time. It was written in Mara's handwriting front and back on the cream-colored stationery she had used for thank you notes and for nothing else. Jonah unfolded it on the kitchen table. His hands, for the first time in a long time, did not shake. He read it slowly, and he read it all the way through, and at some point, about halfway down the second page, he put his forehead in the heel of his hand, and at some point after that, he began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way a man cries when he has carried a weight for 14 months and has just learned that the woman he thought he lost had in fact been walking beside him the whole time. The letter said, "So, my love, if you are reading this second letter, then he did not stop, and I am more sorry than I have words for. I should have told you some of this while I was alive. I did not, because I was a coward about the one subject I could not bear to make you carry with me, and because I believed foolishly that I had more time. I want to tell you the rest of it now. You need to understand who my father is. When I was 12 years old, he struck my mother for what she later told me was the last time. She took me out of that house in the middle of the night with 2 suitcases and a checkbook she had hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Little Women. We lived for the next 22 months with her cousin in Galveston. During that time, she told me what my last name actually was. She told me about the Wentworth Moss Trust. She told me it had been restructured by my great-grandmother to skip a generation if the daughter of the line married badly, which my mother had, And she told me that on my 28th birthday, I would inherit a stewardship. I would spend the rest of my life protecting from the man in Sheridan Valley. My mother died of a stroke 3 weeks before I turned 15. My father tracked us down to her cousin's house in Galveston within a month. He did not come because he missed her Jonah. He came because he had started to suspect. I hid the paperwork at 15 years old inside the floorboards of my great-grandmother's farmhouse, which is the same floorboard Odin found. I have hidden other things in other places. I have spent my entire adult life hiding this fortune from him. And the day I met you on a beach in Corolla, and you told me that the best years of your service had been the ones where nobody had told you thank you, I knew I had met the only man I had ever met who could not be bought. I chose you for 100 reasons. That was the first one. Listen to me. Watch Sawyer's hands. He clenches them when he is holding something in. He clenches them exactly the way you clench yours, and he is going to have to learn the way you learn that the clenching can let go. Teach him that sooner than you think he is ready for it. He will understand. Watch Willa's eyes. She has my mother's fire. She is going to ask you questions you do not know how to answer, and you will answer them anyway because nobody ever answered mine. And I have spent my life working backwards from that silence. The money is real. The evidence in the drives is real. There are criminal indictments waiting inside those files for my father that go back 40 years, and there are men in Galveston and in Casper and in one law office in Austin who are waiting for me or for you to hand them a key. Samuel Pierce knows how. Trust Samuel. Do not trust any man with my last name. And Jonah, please hear me. I did not want to leave you with this. I wanted to grow old with you in a quiet place. I believed for 12 years that we could. When I got sick, I understood that I had been wrong about the timing and that I was going to have to leave you with a war I had been preparing my whole life to fight. I am sorrier than I have language for. But I also want you to know that I chose you for this. I chose you because I knew you were the only person on this earth I could leave this fight to. I have believed in you since the first night in Corolla. I have believed in you every night since. I believe in you right now as I am writing this on a Tuesday in October on the back porch of a rental house with a view of a field I am never going to see again. I love you. I love our children. I am with you in whatever way a woman can be with a man after she is gone. Win this, Jonah. Win it for them. And then when it is over, live the rest of your life the way you and I always said we were going to, quietly, with a forever. MC Jonah sat at the kitchen table for a long time with his forehead in his hand. Willa came over at some point, and she climbed onto his lap without being invited, and she put her small hand on top of his hand, and she did not say anything. Sawyer came and stood at his shoulder with his jaw clenched and then slowly unclenched. Odin laid his head across Jonah's boot and watched the door. June Calloway, standing at the counter, wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist and did not pretend she was doing anything else. Jonah folded the letter back into the envelope. "Tomorrow," he said. His voice was very steady. "Tomorrow we fight back." Odin barked once sharp from the floor by his boot. The reply came at 6:17 the following morning. Jonah was at the kitchen sink with a mug of black coffee when he heard the engines coming up the county road. More than one vehicle, spaced in the deliberate staggered interval of a convoy. He set the mug down without making a sound. He walked to the front window. He counted 5 vehicles as they crested the rise. 3 marked Sheridan County Sheriff's cruisers. 2 unmarked black SUVs. He woke the children. He did it quietly. He put them in the back bedroom with Odin told Sawyer to keep one hand in the dog's collar and to stay against the far wall, and told Willa to keep her brother calm. He called June Calloway on the landline and told her in 6 words to call Samuel Pierce in Billings right now. She did not ask why. She hung up. He went to the front porch in his coat and his boots and with nothing in his hands, and he stood at the top of the steps and waited as the convoy rolled up his drive. 2 deputies out of the lead cruiser, 3 out of the second, 4 private security contractors out of the lead SUV, all ex-military by the shape of their shoulders, all armed under parkas. The second SUV had tinted windows and did not yet open. A young deputy, the one from the lead cruiser, stepped up to the foot of the steps with a folder in his hand. He looked about 24 years old. He looked scared. "Mr. Cade," the deputy's voice cracked, "we are here to enforce a verified emergency custody order out of the 7th Judicial District. We are authorized to remove the minors Sawyer Cade and Willa Cade into the temporary custody of Preston Halloran, pending hearing. Sir, please step aside and keep your hands where I can see them." Jonah did not move his hands. He spoke at a volume that did not reach the edge of the porch. "You don't have cause, son. You don't have proof of harm. You have money behind a stamp, and you have a signed order from a judge who is under federal review, and you have 4 contractors behind you whose uniforms do not match your uniform. I am not stepping aside, and my children are not leaving this house." The deputy swallowed. One of the contractors behind him shifted his weight onto his front foot, which Jonah marked. The deputy reached for the folder. He reached, Jonah realized a half second before he understood why, for the handcuffs on his belt. The front door behind Jonah opened. Odin came through it at a full working sprint. The Belgian Malinois cleared the 4 porch steps in one bound and landed between Jonah and the deputy, with his back to Jonah's knees and his body perfectly square to the convoy, and the noise that came out of him was not a bark. It was the noise a military working dog makes when the next command from its handler might legitimately be the one that ends somebody's afternoon, and every man on that drive, including the contractors, understood it, because every one of them had met a dog like Odin at some point in his life and had been told by somebody with experience to never be the person the dog was looking at. Nobody moved. For 5 full seconds, the only sounds on the property were the idling of 5 engines, the soft panting of a 45-kilogram working dog, and the distant call of a crow on the ridge behind the house. A 6th vehicle came up the drive. It was a dark blue Lincoln. It pulled in behind the convoy and parked crosswise across the bottom of the driveway in a way that would have been a minor traffic violation, except that the driver had clearly not cared about traffic violations since the Carter administration. Samuel Pierce got out of the driver's seat with a leather case under his arm. He walked with the unhurried economy of an old prosecutor, past the rear of the second SUV, past the flank of the lead cruiser, and stopped 10 feet from the young deputy at the foot of the porch steps. He opened the leather case. "Gentlemen," Pierce did not raise his voice, "I am Samuel Pierce of Pierce in Langdon out of Billings, Montana, representing Mr. Jonah Cade. I have here in this folder a federal temporary restraining order filed at 4:06 this morning out of the United States District Court for the District of Wyoming, ordering all parties to cease custody enforcement pending a hearing on the activation of the Wentworth Moss Trust. I have beneath it an emergency motion for disqualification of Judge Dean Fletcher of the 7th Judicial District based on documented contacts with the petitioner that predate the custody filing by 7 years. I have beneath that an affidavit from the Office of the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Texas acknowledging receipt of sealed evidentiary materials from my firm at 11:40 last night. Gentlemen, your order is frozen. Your judge is about to be recused. Your client is about to be investigated. You have about 90 seconds to get off this man's driveway before you become personally named in the federal filing that will be executed at 8 o'clock this morning." The young deputy read the first page of the federal order. His face, which had been pale, went paler. He turned and walked quickly back to his cruiser, and he got on his radio. The tinted window of the second SUV came down. Preston Halloran III stepped out. He was wearing the cashmere scarf, the same one from the night of the expulsion. Jonah saw that before he saw the man's face. Preston came up the drive between the cruisers, and the SUV stopped exactly 6 feet from the foot of the porch steps and looked up at his son-in-law for the first time in 14 months. He spoke first. "Mr. Cade," his voice was calm, "you are unfit, you are unstable, you are dangerous. You are holding my grandchildren hostage in a condemned structure with a service animal that has already drawn on a deputy of this county, and I will spend every dollar I have to correct that regardless of what Mr. Pierce has filed this morning. Jonah did not raise his voice. Preston, Mara chose me. Mara trusted me, and Mara protected our children from you. Preston's jaw moved. It was almost nothing. It was the smallest possible movement of the smallest muscle in a disciplined face that had not allowed itself to show a single thing in 68 years. But Jonah, who had spent a professional life watching men under pressure, saw it. Pierce saw it. The lead contractor behind Preston saw it. And Odin, whose entire training was built around reading the exact moment when a human being's composure began to fail, saw it most clearly of anyone. The second contractor behind the second SUV had not seen it. The second contractor took one step forward, raised a collapsible steel baton, and swung it in a short, vicious arc at the flank of the Belgian Malinois standing on the porch steps. He connected. Odin took the blow across his left shoulder. He did not cry out. He did not fall. He planted his feet, pivoted into the strike instead of away from it, and would have in another half second removed a significant portion of the contractor's forearm if Jonah had not said his name. Odin. The dog stopped. Blood was already darkening the fur along his left shoulder, running down between the tendons, dripping in a slow, steady pattern onto the wooden step beneath him. He did not look at the wound. He looked at Jonah. Jonah came down the steps slow, one boot at a time, and he put his hand flat on the top of the Malinois' head, and he said softly, "Stand down, buddy. I've got it." Odin lowered his head. He turned by degrees, and he walked 3 steps to where Willa was standing, because she had come out into the porch at some point that Jonah had not noticed, and he pressed his bleeding shoulder against her small leg, and he stood there with her fingers in his collar. Willa was crying, not loudly, not the way an 8-year-old cries, the way a woman cries. Samuel Pierce on the drive did not raise his voice either. "Ambulance is already coming." His tone had changed. It had become in an instant the tone of a man who was about to file additional charges. "There is also a veterinary ambulance, which my firm keeps on retainer for reasons that have nothing to do with this case but are about to have everything to do with it. And that deputy in the lead cruiser who I noticed did not draw a weapon during the assault on a federally certified service animal is going to be the witness who makes sure the man with the baton does not go home tonight." The contractor with the baton had gone white. Preston Halloran III looked at the blood on his son-in-law's porch step. He looked at the small girl with her fingers in a bleeding dog's collar. He looked for the first time Jonah could remember in 11 years of knowing him like a man who had understood that he had miscalculated something and that he did not yet know how much the miscalculation was going to cost him. He did not apologize. He turned and walked back to the second SUV. At the door with his hand on the handle, he paused and looked up at the porch. "I will see you in court, Mr. Cade." His voice was flat. Jonan, with one hand on Odin's uninjured shoulder and one hand on the railing of his dead wife's grandmother's farmhouse, looked down at the man who had thrown a ceramic lamp into the snow in front of a small, shivering girl 14 days ago, and he answered without raising his voice in a tone that Mara Cade somewhere would have recognized immediately. "Yes, Preston, you will." The hearing was set for the 3rd Monday in March in the federal courthouse in Casper, Wyoming, in the courtroom of Judge Elena Varga, who had been appointed to the bench by a Democratic governor in 2011 and who had a reputation among attorneys in the 10th Circuit for 2 things. She did not tolerate theater, and she had in 1993 lost a younger sister to a custody dispute that had ended badly, and she was known to read every page of every exhibit put in front of her before she walked into her own courtroom. Samuel Pierce had told Jonah this on the drive down. "She will not like what you are about to show her." Pierce had spoken evenly with both hands on the wheel of the blue Lincoln. "She will not cry, Mr. Cade. She does not cry in courtrooms. But she will understand what your wife built, and she will understand what your father-in-law has done. And when Elena Varga understands a thing, she rules on it. She does not wait for appeals. She does not wait for reporters. She rules." The courtroom was packed by 9 in the morning. Jonah had not expected that. Pierce had expected it, and had not told him, which Jonah understood later was a kindness. The Billings Gazette had run a front-page piece on Saturday under the byline of a reporter Pierce had known for 30 years. The wire services had picked it up by Sunday morning. By Monday at 9, there were 17 reporters in the gallery, 3 of them from national desks. Behind the reporters, in the back, 3 rows, were people from Cold Fork. June Calloway was there in a blue dress Jonah had never seen her wear. Reverend Matthew Hayes from the Cold Fork Lutheran Church was there. Dale Rennick, who ran the sawmill Jonah had assumed 3 weeks ago belonged to the kind of neighbor who would be suspicious of newcomers, was there in a clean shirt with his hat in his lap. Sheriff Ray Dillard was there in uniform and was, to the naked eye, deeply uncomfortable to be in a federal building, which was his right as a 16-year county sheriff. Across the aisle, Preston Halloran III sat flanked by 3 attorneys in identical charcoal suits who were whispering to each other in a rapid way that Jonah, after an hour of watching them, identified as the whispering of men who had not slept. Jonah wore the one suit he owned. It was navy. It had been cleaned. Willa had insisted on fixing his tie herself before they left the hotel, and she had fixed it crooked, and Pierce had quietly fixed it straight in the elevator without saying anything. Sawyer and Willa were in the second row behind the bar with June Calloway between them. Odin was at Jonah's left boot. The Malinois had been cleared by his veterinarian on Thursday to travel. The gash across his left shoulder had been stitched in 18 places by a veterinary surgeon in Billings on the afternoon of the standoff under a court order Pierce had obtained in 90 minutes, and the dressing was still there under his working harness. He walked with a slight favoring of the left side. He did not complain. He lay down at Jonah's boot when Jonah sat, and he placed one paw across the toe of Jonah's dress shoe, the way he placed one paw on Jonah's boot at the farmhouse kitchen table, and he did not move it for the next 3 hours. Judge Varga entered at 9:03. She was a small woman with iron-colored hair and the kind of posture that suggested she had been told once at a very young age that slouching was a character flaw. She looked at both counsel tables. She looked at the gallery. She looked longer than Jonah expected at the dog under the petitioner's table. Then she opened a black binder in front of her, and she said, "I have read every page of what both counsel have submitted. I have read every exhibit. I will hear Mr. Pierce's presentation of evidence in the order he has filed it. Mr. Halloran's counsel will respond. There will be no objections during presentation unless the objection is to admissibility. Mr. Pierce, you may begin." Samuel Pierce stood. He did not approach the bench. He stayed at the counsel table. He opened a second folder, and he said quietly, "Your Honor, I will present 6 items of evidence. They are arranged in ascending order. The first item is a photograph taken by the respondent on February 25th of this year of cut power lines on the north side of the property at Cold Fork, Sheridan County. The cut was clean. The tread marks in the snow were identified by Sheriff Dillard as belonging to a rental vehicle not native to the county. This was not an accident. This was an act of deliberate infrastructure disruption against a household containing 2 minor children. The photograph went up on the screen. The courtroom was very quiet. The second item, Pierce laid down a second folder. This is a photograph taken on February 21st from the respondent's property of a black SUV parked on a BLM turnout adjacent to the county road. The same SUV, Your Honor, that appeared outside my law office in Billings on February 23rd, while the respondent was present in my office learning for the first time the value of his late wife's trust. This is not coincidence. This is surveillance coordinated across state lines of a grieving widower and 2 orphaned children. The second photograph went up. The third item, Pierce's voice did not change. This is a set of Wentworth Moss Trust notifications dated from 2017 through 2024, bearing the forged signature of Mara Cade. Forensic document analysis completed on Sunday afternoon by Dr. Lillian Osei of the University of Utah confirms that none of these signatures were produced by Mrs. Cade. They were produced by a single unknown hand attempting to intercept trust correspondence before it reached the legitimate beneficiary. The purpose of this interception, Your Honor was to prevent Mrs. Cade from learning that her father had been attempting since her diagnosis to redirect the stewardship of her family's estate into his own hands. This is mail fraud. This is wire fraud. This is interference with a federally protected fiduciary instrument. Preston Halloran did not move. The whispering at his table had stopped. The fourth item. Pierce paused. This is an affidavit sworn by Sheriff Raymond Dillard of Sheridan County, Wyoming on Friday, last documenting 3 separate false reports made to his office in the last 45 days by 2 men who do not live in his county, do not own property in his county, and whose financial records subpoenaed on Saturday show payments originating from an LLC with a single listed officer. That officer is the petitioner, Mr. Preston Halloran III. The reports allege variously child endangerment, domestic disturbance, and illegal discharge of firearms at the Coal Fork address. None of the allegations was true. All 3 were designed, Your Honor, to create a paper trail of law enforcement contact that could be cited in the emergency custody petition before this court. Judge Varga's expression did not change. Her pen moved on the legal pad in front of her. The fifth item. Pierce let a silence sit for 3 seconds before he spoke. This is a photograph dated August of 2017 of the petitioner at a private wedding reception shaking hands with the Honorable Dean Fletcher of the 7th Judicial District of Wyoming. Judge Fletcher is the judge who signed the emergency custody order at the heart of this case. The photograph is one of 11 we have entered into evidence showing a personal and financial relationship between the petitioner and Judge Fletcher extending from 1999 to the present. Judge Fletcher has been recused from this matter as of last Wednesday. He is, as of this morning, the subject of a preliminary inquiry by the Wyoming Commission on Judicial Conduct. Your Honor, the emergency custody order underlying this hearing was not an order. It was a favor. Preston's eldest attorney began to stand. Judge Varga looked at him once. He sat back down. The sixth item. Pierce took a small cassette player out of his leather case and placed it on the counsel table. Your Honor, I am going to play with the court's permission an audio recording that was made by my client's late wife, Mrs. Mara Cade, on November 14th of 2024, approximately 3 weeks before her death. The recording is 31 seconds long. It was recovered from a flash drive sealed in a container hidden by Mrs. Cade on her grandmother's property in Wyoming and located by the respondent and his service animal on February 27th of this year. I have filed with the court the chain of custody documentation for this recording. I have filed with the court the forensic authentication. Mrs. Cade's voice is about to speak in this courtroom. I would ask the court and opposing counsel in the gallery and the petitioner to give her the same courtesy she no longer has the ability to demand for herself. He pressed play. Mara's voice came into the courtroom. It was weaker than Jonah remembered. It was the voice of the last month, not the first. It had the roughened edges of somebody who had lost 15 pounds she could not afford to lose, and it had the careful, measured pacing of a woman choosing every word because she knew she would not get to choose them again. Jonah closed his eyes. Odin lifted his head from Jonah's boot. The dog had never heard Mara's voice. He had never met her. But the moment the recording began, his ears tipped forward, and he held perfectly still the way a working dog holds still when it has decided to listen to something it does not yet understand. My name is Mara Cade. I was Mara Halloran. I am recording this on November 14th, 2024. If you are hearing this, then I am gone, and my father has tried to take my children from their father. His name is Preston Halloran III. When I was 12 years old, he assaulted my mother. Dates, witnesses, and medical records are in the file. When I was 15, he attempted to falsify my grandmother's will to redirect the Wentworth Moss inheritance to himself. The affidavit of her personal attorney is in the file. When I met Jonah Cade, my father told me verbatim that he would rather see me dead than married to a public school veteran. If something has happened to me that is not cancer, investigate. If he is attempting to take custody of Sawyer and Willa, deny him. Jonah is the best man I have ever known. Sawyer, Willa, I love you. I am watching. Do not be afraid. I am with you. My name is Mara Cade." The recording ended. The courtroom was silent for 11 seconds. Jonah kept his eyes closed. He felt Odin press very gently against his left ankle. Somewhere in the second row behind him, his daughter was weeping, and his son, whose jaw had been clenched for 14 months, was not clenching it anymore. Samuel Pierce, who had prosecuted federal cases for 22 years before he had opened his own firm, wiped his face with a folded white handkerchief and then put the handkerchief back in his breast pocket. Judge Varga sat perfectly still. Then, without looking at her pad, she turned her head and looked directly at Jonah Cade. "Mr. Cade," her voice was level, "do you wish to address the court?" Jonah had not planned to. Pierce had advised him not to, in fact, because Pierce's professional rule in federal court was to let the evidence speak for itself. But Jonah stood up. He stood up before he knew he was standing. He laid his hand briefly on the top of Odin's head. He spoke without notes. "Your Honor, I served this country for 15 years. I have carried men out of rooms I cannot describe, and I have buried some of them, and I have been the one who had to write to their mothers. I have not, in those 15 years, been afraid of very much. I was afraid 14 days ago on my father-in-law's driveway when he put my children into a snowstorm with nothing. I was afraid again the night my wife's letter came up out of a floor. She had hidden it under 10 years before she met me. And I have been afraid, Your Honor, every single day since I understood that the man across the aisle from me wanted my children, not because he loves them, but because he wanted something my wife hid from him for 30 years. I am not afraid today. I do not know exactly why. I think it has something to do with my wife's voice in this room. I will not let anyone take my children from me. Thank you, Your Honor." He sat down. Willa was crying silently 2 rows behind him with both hands flat over her mouth. Judge Varga did not recess. She closed her black binder. She folded her hands on top of it. She spoke clearly and without hurry for exactly 4 minutes. She dismissed the custody petition with prejudice. She vacated the emergency order of February 18th. She confirmed, pending the fiduciary hearing already scheduled for April, that Jonah Cade retained sole legal and physical custody of Sawyer and Willa Cade, and that the Wentworth Moss Trust activation was valid. She ordered the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Texas to coordinate with her clerk on the sealed criminal materials submitted the previous week. She referred Preston Halloran III for investigation by the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation on charges including witness tampering, infrastructure tampering, and conspiracy to corrupt a judicial officer. She suspended all contact, direct or indirect, between the petitioner and the minor children, pending the outcome of that investigation. She looked one last time at Preston Halloran III. "Sir, you spent the 14 months after your daughter's death attempting to undo the one thing she was trying to protect. You should know, before you leave this courtroom, that she beat you. She beat you from a rented porch in October on 4 pages of stationery and a cassette tape. I do not usually speak to petitioners in this manner. I am doing so today because I do not ever want to see another filing in this court with your name on it." She tapped her gavel once. Odin barked exactly once from the floor under Jonah's table. Sharp, short, certain. Preston Halloran III stood up. He did not look at his son-in-law. He spoke at the door to one of his attorneys in a voice Jonah barely heard. "This isn't over." Pierce gathered his papers without looking up. Jonah gathered his son under his right arm and his daughter under his left. He walked out of the federal courthouse in Casper, Wyoming, with June Calloway behind him carrying both of the children's coats, and with Samuel Pierce behind her, and with a Belgian Malinois at his side walking on stitches, and he stepped out into a cold, bright March afternoon that smelled of snow melt off the Laramie Range. He answered Preston's parting line in the empty parking lot to nobody in a voice too low for anyone but the dog to hear. "Yes, Preston, it is. Spring came late to Cold Fork that year." Jonah drove out to Black Ridge on a Tuesday morning in April, alone with Odin in the passenger seat in a thermos of coffee on the floorboard. The snow had receded to the north slopes. The hayfield on the Wentworth place, which Ada had not planted since the 80s, was starting to green at the margins. Jonah parked at the turnout at the base of the ridge. He got out. He let Odin out. He took the coffee and a small roll bundle of blue lupine from a local grower in Sheridan, and he started up the ridge trail, and the dog walked at his left knee, occasionally brushing the back of Jonah's calf with the side of his head, the way Odin always walked when he thought his handler needed to be reminded that he was there. Mara's marker was at the top of the ridge. Jonah had made it himself from a piece of cedar he had found in Ada's barn the week after she died. It was simple and weathered now from 14 months of Wyoming wind. He had carved her name into it with a pocket knife on a Saturday in December while the twins were at a neighbor's house, and he had not gone up to see it, if he was being honest with himself, since the previous July. He knelt in front of it. He laid the lupine across the base. He spoke without raising his voice because there was nobody on the ridge but a dog who already knew. I got your letters, Mara. Both of them. I wish you had told me sooner. I would have fought beside you, baby. I would have fought every single day for the rest of your life. His voice broke on the next sentence. He let it. I am so sorry I couldn't save you. The wind came up the face of the ridge. Somewhere in the pines behind him, a gray jay called twice and went quiet. Odin sat down in the grass beside him and pressed the long line of his body against Jonah's hip and rested his muzzle across Jonah's forearm. The flash came fast. It was heat. It was the particular dry grit taste of pulverized concrete. It was the shape of a doorway in a building that had not existed for 9 years. And Corporal Elias Reed was shouting something from inside it, and Jonah felt the edges of his vision start to go. He caught it. He put his right hand into the ruff of fur at Odin's neck. He breathed in through his nose for 3 counts. He breathed out through his mouth for 4 counts. He did this twice. The ridge came back. 3 breaths. The whole episode from onset to resolution lasted less than a quarter of a minute. Odin waited until Jonah's breathing had stopped being quick, and then the dog got up and sniffed at the base of the marker and looked at Jonah, asking in the particular way a working dog asks whether they were moving on. Jonah rubbed his palm along the top of the cedar. Yeah, buddy, in a minute. He stayed there for 10 minutes more, and then he stood up and he turned and he started back down the ridge with his dog walking at his left knee. About halfway down, he saw the footprints. They were in the last of the snow in a patch of shadow on the north side of a boulder. A man's boot, size 11. Vibra sole with a specific worn chip at the inside of the right heel that Jonah had noted and filed in the snow behind the barn in February. The prints were fresh, less than a day old, and they led up to the ridge and stopped at a cairn of rocks about 40 feet from Mara's marker and turned and went back down the way they had come. Caught on the edge of the cairn on a sharp gray chip of stone was a small thread of fabric. Cashmere. The same cashmere Jonah had noted at a different distance on the scarf around Preston Halloran's throat the night of the expulsion. Jonah stood with the thread between his thumb and forefinger for a long time. He did not feel fear. He had expected to feel fear for most of his adult life in moments like this, and he had stopped feeling it somewhere in the last 8 weeks. What he felt instead was clarity, a kind of cold, bright water at the back of his mind. He came up here. Jonah spoke to the dog. His voice was level. He came up here by himself after the hearing, before the order went through. He came up here to say something to her. Odin watched him. I don't care what he said. Jonah put the thread into his coat pocket. I made her a promise on the day of her diagnosis that I would protect them. And I will. He walked the rest of the way down the ridge in sunlight. By the time he reached the truck, the ghosts in his chest were still there. They were, Jonah understood, probably going to be there for the rest of his life. But they no longer controlled him. They walked beside him now. They walked the way Odin walked at the left knee, occasionally brushing the back of his calf, reminding him only that they were there. He called Samuel Pierce from the turnout at the bottom of the ridge. Sam, his voice was very steady. The trust. I want to talk about what Mara would have wanted us to build with it. I think I know. Pierce was quiet for a second on the other end of the line. Then he said in the flat, careful tone of a man who had been hoping to hear that sentence for 14 months, Tell me. They broke ground in June. The Wentworth Moss Veterans and K-9 Retreat was built on the 340 acres surrounding the Cold Fork farmhouse, which Jonah did not sell and did not tear down. He restored it. He reshingled the sagging east side of the roof himself with help from Dale Rennick and two of Dale's sons from the sawmill, and he sanded the pine floors by hand, and he rebuilt the porch step that had been missing the night he drove up the first time, and he left the patch where the floorboard had collapsed exactly as it had been, with a small brass plaque set into the repair that read simply, "Here she left us away." The rest of the retreat went up around the original house. 8 cabins at first, a training field for working dogs along the southern fence line, a dining hall which June Calloway agreed after a long, careful conversation on the porch of the Cold Fork Diner to run, a small chapel at the north edge of the property, which Reverend Matthew Hayes consecrated one Sunday morning in August with the entire town in attendance, a stone memorial at the top of the drive with the names of fallen Cold Fork servicemen going back to 1917, which Willa helped to design and which she returned to every Sunday that first summer with a handful of wildflowers in her fist. The volunteers came out of the town in waves Jonah had not expected. Dale Rennick brought lumber at cost and then after 3 weeks brought it for free and then brought his crew. June Calloway fed everyone. Reverend Hayes organized the Sunday meals and privately 2 funerals that occurred during the summer for men from the town Jonah had not known. Sheriff Ray Dillard, who retired in July, came every Tuesday afternoon in civilian clothes and did electrical work, which he had apparently done professionally before he went into law enforcement in 1986, and which he had not told anyone about in 40 years. Odin sat at Ray's feet for the entirety of every Tuesday shift, which Ray pretended not to notice, and which Ray, in private conversation with June Calloway, admitted was the reason he kept coming back. Odin was everywhere. The Malinois had healed. The scar on his left shoulder was barely visible under thick fur, except when the light caught it at a certain angle. He trailed Jonah through the construction site with the easy attention of a working dog who had decided that this was now his jurisdiction. He was paid for in affection by every volunteer who passed through and by every child who visited. He slept at the foot of Willa's bed every night for the first 3 months, which was a thing Jonah noticed and did not interrupt. Willa had grown taller over the summer. She had her mother's carriage. She wore on her 8th birthday in September the cream-colored wool shawl with the small brown flowers along the hem, which she had asked Jonah for in June, and which Jonah had folded into her hands on the morning of her birthday without saying anything, because he had not been able to find the words, and because Mara had told him once, long before any of this, that sometimes the best thing you could do with a piece of fabric was put it around the shoulders of the person it was always meant for. Sawyer trained with Odin on weekends. The boy's jaw, which he had clenched for 14 months, had begun by midsummer to unclench. He was learning commands in the order Jonah had learned them at Coronado. He was learning to read the small shifts in an animal's posture that told him something was changing. He was, Jonah realized by late August, the kind of child who would grow up to be a very quiet and very effective man, and he would not be a man like his grandfather, and he would not be a man like his father either. He would be a third thing, which was his own. Preston Halloran III came to the retreat for the first time in October. He came alone. He came in a single car. No convoy, no attorneys. Just an old gray Mercedes. He drove himself the 6 hours up from Wind River on a Wednesday morning with autumn in the cottonwoods. He parked at the gate and he waited. He did not come up the drive. He waited until Jonah came down to him. 6 months had passed since the hearing. Preston was smaller than Jonah remembered. He had lost weight. The cashmere scarf, Jonah noted distantly, was not with him. Preston stood beside the fence with his hands at his sides, and he spoke first. "I came alone, Mr. Cade." Jonah did not answer. He let the silence sit. "I lost my daughter. I nearly lost my grandchildren. I realize now that I came very close to losing the only chance I will ever have to do any of this better. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am not entitled to ask for it. I am asking only whether under conditions of your choosing, I may see them again before I die. Jonah studied him for a long time. He thought about the iron gates. He thought about the lamp turning once in the air. He thought about Mara at 15 years old hiding trust documents inside the floorboards of her grandmother's farmhouse. He thought about a recording played in a federal courtroom in Casper in March. Supervised visits, Jonah said finally. Here at the retreat, always with Mr. Pierce or me present, always with the children's consent each time. If they say no to a visit, there is no visit. Ever. You will pay into a trust administered by Sam for restitution to the families of the 3 men you hired to surveil my house, the 2 men who made the false reports to Sheriff Dillard in the veterinary bill for my dog. You will not contest the investigation of Judge Fletcher. You will not attempt through any party to reach the Wentworth Moss assets now or ever. Those are the conditions. Preston Halloran III stood at the fence with autumn light on his face and his hands trembling very slightly at his sides. It was the first time Jonah had seen his father-in-law's hands tremble in 11 years. Odin stood 10 feet back from the gate with his ears neutral. He did not growl. He did not relax. He was simply watching the way he watched everyone at the retreat, now reserving judgment until it was earned. I accept, Preston said, all of it. The first visit was 3 weeks later. Sawyer and Willa talked quietly to their grandfather under a bare cottonwood at the edge of the training field for an hour and 14 minutes. Odin watched the visit from a distance of 15 feet, unmoving, attentive, and did not once intervene. Jonah watched from the porch of the farmhouse with Samuel Pierce at his elbow and June Calloway on his other side, and when Preston stood up to leave, Willa of her own accord reached up and let him hold her hand for 3 seconds at the gate before she walked back to her father, and Jonah understood in that moment that Mara had built a room inside this whole thing that he had not known was part of the blueprint. The room was called Grace. It did not mean that Preston had become a good man. It meant that the world occasionally had enough space for a man to try to become less of the man he had been. That was all it meant. It was enough. Mara had wanted it. 1 year after the expulsion, on a February morning when the snow lay 2 feet deep along the ridge, and the Wentworth Moss retreat was running at full capacity with 6 veterans in residence and 3 working dogs in training, Jonah Cade climbed the hill above the farmhouse with Sawyer on one side and Willa on the other, and Odin walking ahead of them through fresh powder with the patient, unhurried pace of a team who had walked this hill before and considered it his. They stopped at the overlook. Odin circled the 3 of them once in the snow, slow the way he circled anything he had decided was his to protect, and then settled at Willa's left hip with his flank against her knee. Below them in the valley, the cabins of the retreat were warm squares of gold against the snow. The training field was fenced. June's truck was parked at the dining hall. The farmhouse, restored with new shingles and a mended step, sat at the center of everything, like the small, stubborn heart it had always been. Odin stopped at the edge of the overlook. He turned once to look at Jonah, and then he dropped his nose to the snow and began to dig. He dug in a specific spot at the base of the old cottonwood that stood by itself at the top of the hill. The cottonwood Jonah and Mara had stood beneath on a morning in August of the year before she got sick, when she had told him about the lump. Odin dug for about 30 seconds. He lifted his head. Something small and metallic was on the end of his tongue. Jonah knelt. Odin dropped it into his palm. It was Mara's wedding ring. The gold band Jonah had put on her finger in 2014, which she had taken off in the last week of her life when her hands had grown too thin for it, and which she had given Jonah understood at once to a dog, and told a dog to put somewhere neither she nor Jonah would be able to find without him. He held it in his glove. He slid it onto the chain around his neck alongside his dog tags, and he pressed it once briefly through the fabric of his coat against the center of his chest. Then he put his hand on the top of Odin's head, and he stood, and he looked down at the valley with his son on his left and his daughter on his right. Some doors close with iron and contempt. Some of them close with a man's calm voice and a cashmere scarf and a box on a drive in the snow. But sometimes a dog finds the other kind of door. A door under rotted floorboards in a grandmother's house. A door inside a man who had stopped kept believing somewhere between Mosul and Virginia Beach that he deserved one. Mara Cade had known which doors to leave unlocked in a life that had been built end to end around the ones somebody else had locked against her. And Odin, a stubborn Belgian Malinois with a scar on his shoulder and a slight favoring of the left side when the weather turned, had known which ones to open. He barked once from the top of the ridge. Sharp, short, certain. If this story moved you, drop a 1 in the comments. One for every person who ever stood their ground for the people they love when somebody with money and patience thought they could not. If you want more stories that honor good people fighting back the right way, subscribe and stick around for the next one. We will see you there.